Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Art of Family podcast. COTS, we love having these conversations. My name is Aisha Morrell-Ferguson. I'm the Chief Development Officer with COTS, and I'm joined here today by two very long-time friends, I'm going to say at this point. I met you all first in 2012, so I'm joined by Larry Gardner and by Rodd Monts, two long-term volunteers and friends of COTS. Care to say hello?
Hello, and thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
After 20 years starting this, it's a pleasure to finally be back and to have the podcast come to fruition to honor the COTS's 40th anniversary.
Our relationship started before there were such things as
podcasts. Right?
That's
yeah.
Right. And maybe cell phones too.
That's possible. I know that that when I came onto COTS, on board with COTS, actually in 2010, so 12 years ago, I was introduced to you all when I came on board and was working and collaborating with you to help capture stories. But you all began working with COTS well before. And so before we get into that, I do want to just say, so many of you know we've celebrated our 40th anniversary officially in May of this year. But recently, Rodd and Larry, we went back to the beginning and we dug up a bunch of creative stories that they helped to pen and to capture on film so that we could produce this lovely, lovely piece of work called From Coalition on Temporary Shelter to Creating Opportunities to Succeed, our 40th anniversary magazine to commemorate the accomplishments that the organization has seen over the last 40 years. We wanted to do this to take an opportunity to reflect on our past, to celebrate the accomplishments over the present, and then to look forward to the future. And so let's go back.
40 years seems like a blink of time right now.
It does. And that was what, 1982? So long time ago.
Yeah, I think I first started volunteering at COTS in 1997.
That's how Rodd and I first met.
Yeah.
Christmas,
I would volunteer to recruit volunteers to prepare and serve meals.
Okay.
And then later, I volunteered through a program. I can't remember the name of it, but we would recruit volunteers to stage holiday parties. Mm-hmm. So we'd, buy gifts, serve a meal, do arts and crafts, have a Santa show up and take pictures. I think it was called Adopted Shelter.
Okay.
So between preparing the meals and Adopted Shelter, I recruited a lot of people I knew to help out at COTS.
And the concept of COTS was so much different than when Rodd and I first started in starting this photojournalism project, and even to the time when you were here, it's more family oriented right now.
Yeah, I know, because when we initially started as an organization, our focus was on supporting the needs of single men originally, and then that expanded to single men and single women. But then as time went on, I know that the leaders in the organization began to see more and more families come into the shelter. And when you all began collaborating on this particular project in 2002, right? Because it was about 20 years ago.
Correct.
Yeah, so 2002, you not only were capturing stories of single men or single women, but even at the beginning, you were capturing family stories.
And as I reflect back, I think it was Mitch Allen doing his talk show on radio that was sort of recruiting volunteers as well. Mm-hmm. And obviously the sponsorship of COTS has gone well beyond what was dreamed at that time, which is a monumental success story to COTS.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there was a relationship. It's funny because Mitch at one point did a feature about Larry and I. We had a relationship with Mitch through an organization called Volunteer Impact.
Oh, wow.
I wrote a story about them, and it sounded like an interesting concept, so I decided to volunteer, and it just continued from there. Yeah, and so Mitch was a supporter of Volunteer Impact, which is how I came to develop a relationship with him. He used to help with a big event they had called Hands on Detroit Day, which was a volunteer blitz, but COTS was always featured prominently on the list of volunteer opportunities for Volunteer Impact.
That's awesome.
That's how I decided to try it.
That's awesome. Mitch Allen has been a longtime friend and supporter of COTS, and it's interesting that your initial engagement coming through that partnership and collaboration that he helped to support and lead.
That's how we met, basically.
That being how you met. and he himself being a writer and storyteller. But one of the things that was pivotal for us was when Mitch also introduced the Illich Children's Charities to COTS and helped us to establish Bright Beginnings because of the number of families that we saw coming in. And so I just look at the connection and how just how community comes together to help meet needs. And even in talking about this photojournalism project, being able to share these stories and tell these stories.
Speaking of sharing the stories, Rodd was an ex-TV reporter and had an ability to bring out, I can't say the best of people, but certainly agonizing stories as well as success stories. And it was sitting here taking pictures of these folks, the residents, while Rodd was doing the majority of the interviewing. Was a nice being able to interplay in terms of the two of us, something that for a photojournalism project, I'd never done before.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. So tell me, because each of you have the stories that stand out the most to you, and you talk a little bit about that in the project itself. But talk to me a bit about the story that was most compelling to you, Larry.
Probably I have to look through in terms of the. I mean, there were so many.
Right?
Yeah.
One of the ones. Do you remember her name? It's right here with who the resident was.
Is that Kendry?
It was just, and the photo captured was Rodd talking with this person. She was clutching her Bible with one hand and telling, just in terms of her own story, not ever how she was humiliated as a homeless person, but how coming to the shelter and with professional, passionate people like yourselves at COTS, in terms of having a place to develop and feel comfortable, and the stories that she had in terms of growing up with her children, all that, it was just compelling to me, Rodd. I know you felt the same way.
Yeah, and despite dealing with her homelessness and all of the things that she had going on in her life, she was physically ill. She was dealing with a lot of medical issues at that time, but she just had so much spirit and enthusiasm.
That's so awesome.
And really enjoyed the conversation that we had. It was just.
And the picture that I took, it's in the booklet over here. I think just nice. I mean, Rodd is so much engrossed in her listening to her story, and she's just there. I don't know if she's holding her cane at the time, but the two of them had a terrific rapport together.
Yeah. And I remember, again, after having met you all and kind of being part and taking part in helping to facilitate some of these interviews, I remember how engaging you all were with clients, and how the conversations were. They brought so much freedom. I think that's the best way to explain it. Like, sometimes people were a little hesitant at first to engage in conversations, but once you kind of explained what we were doing, helping to let them know that we were looking to share their voice, not create a voice for them. You were really, really great at helping them to feel comfortable and to share freely. And I believe on many occasions, from my, me witnessing it, I saw that the conversation would go on and go naturally. And sometimes we'd have to really say, okay, hey, we're running out of time. But it just was such a great conversation. So talk to me about just how you engaged and just your thoughts behind trying to help them be comfortable and be able to share so freely and so transparently.
Yeah, my motivation for this project was really trying to put a face on homelessness so that people understood there, but for the grace of God, right? Yeah, because folks had usually a negative stereotype about who ends up homeless, and the reality is that it can happen to anyone. And I just wanted people to know that, and I wanted people to humanize folks who were experiencing homelessness so that they understood it was a situation that they were going through. It wasn't an indictment on their personality, right? So while I did not share that with everybody I talked to, that was my motivation for getting their story out.
Well, at the same time, since it spans 20 plus years in terms of when we started this and today, is that Detroit was going through its economic recession and bankruptcy.
Yes.
And so the homeless people accelerated. and it was just, part of what Rodd and I also conceived the photojournalist project as a fundraiser. And through stops and starts with COTS and change of directors, and how you, Aisha, also as the Chief Development Officer, and Cheryl Johnson picked it up and embraced this. We were appreciative in terms of COTS understanding the value of a concept that Rodd and I had initiated. And to see it, one of the stories that was compelling to me, Rodd, if you remember, and I don't remember, it was a family. It was not in Linda. And she had 3 sons, and they were not living in the Peterborough COTS facility. They were moved into an independent housing that COTS had owned, I believe, at the time. And they were self-sufficient, paying rent and covering their normal food expenses and all that. And it was incredible. I mean, one of them was a high school basketball star, as I recall, and to hear their own stories and rising above homelessness and how they contributed. And I know you used my photo that we took of this in several publications at COTS. So as a photojournalist now, I'm really appreciative of recognizing that too. But the interplay of Rodd interviewing and myself trying to capture what I would call the portrait of these people. The other thing that amazed us is out of the 40 people that Rodd and I interviewed, there was only 1 or 2 people that didn't want their stories told. They didn't mind telling Rodd and I the story, but they didn't feel comfortable in having it broadcast. And maybe you can amplify that in terms of the frankness and the candor of people that we did interview.
Yeah, and I think it's because of the way that people perceive folks who are going through homelessness. They didn't want to have to carry that baggage around with them, right? And I am sympathetic to that and understanding of it.
But also, the thing that impressed, I think, the 2 of us is that COTS has developed a roadmap. You call it opportunistic opportunities, not trying to be redundant, but it's true. When a person comes here and being in a drug-free environment and void of family disinheritance, if you would, and a roadmap of how to get to where these people to realize their dreams, it's no short miracle, I think, of how you approach this.
Yeah, and our take, and for many that know us, and for those that are getting to know us, our biggest step toward that was the passport to self-sufficiency. And so being able to connect with our families and partner with them in not only setting their own goals, but then providing support so that they can achieve those goals. I think that as I look back on COTS over the years and how even engaging with families in this fashion, capturing their stories, capturing their photos, it helped us to look at the importance of building relationships through these creative means, artistic means, and ultimately even that setting the stage for how we engage now. Like I look at, and mind you, having an opportunity to kind of connect and collaborate with the 2 of you beginning in 2010, and then working to support COTS and marketing initiatives over the course of all those years. Now our marketing strategy is very much in line with what you all helped us to set up.
So here's a personal question, okay? Now that we're on film and everything. What caused you to personally embrace the project that was sort of dropped in successive years and then picked up by you and Cheryl Johnson?
So the biggest thing was that storytelling is the key to helping to show what success looks like. So COTS, we have this picture of what we believe success looks like, and it has a lot to do with partnership, collaboration, and support, right? And being able to look back at these stories, look at the conversations that were had, hearing the voices of the families that shared, it was the perfect segue to show, okay, this is who COTS used to be and how we used to operate. This is who we are now, and we want to continue carrying this mantle forward, and we want to share that in this broad form so that everybody knows. So you helped us to understand and embrace the importance of storytelling in a very different way. And I think the other piece to it is that timing was of the essence for the organization. As much as we really were trying to do this project in years past, we just didn't have the resources available at the time. And so having the resources available and then being able to tie it to, who we were and who we are now, it was just perfect. It was a perfect opportunity.
In the terms of the fundraising, I have to give a little plug while we're at it to my fraternity brothers from the University of Wisconsin. which way back in 2021-22 contributed a fair amount of money to you going out.
Absolutely.
Because one of the people who's a noted plastic surgeon out of Beverly Hills, California, came here. His father, who happened to be going through Henry Ford Hospital with a kidney issue and dialysis, but so he went out and was a spear. So we're doing that again too. So we expect to get quite a bit of money coming in addition to which has already been raised. So I'm giving these Pylam fraternity brothers a bit of a plug as we do this.
Awesome. Well, we're going to come back and have a conversation about the fundraising initiatives connected to this in a moment. Just going to take a break, and we hope that you stay tuned and join us again in a moment. Hello. Thank you for joining us again. I'm Aisha Morrell-Ferguson with COTS, and I'm joined again today by Larry Gardner and Rodd Monts, two volunteers, longtime volunteers and photojournalists that are joining us, that have committed their time and effort for more than 20 years now to help us put together a project telling the stories of those that we've engaged with over the course of COTS tenure. And so before we went to break, we were just chatting about fundraising and kind of the way that we're utilizing this as a tool to share compelling stories and to support our fundraising initiatives. But I want you to talk to me a little bit about what the most captivating conversations have been out of this particular project.
Again, I'll start off. There's one individual who has, since we did the book, starting, it was one of the early things, and it was actually a black and white photograph as well as color. Kurt, who had been here, and one of the things that Rodd brought out in terms of the narrative, he says, COTS is not like a passageway, but a home. And it was very compelling. Here it is, a very educated individual that embraced the entire structure of COTS. He was well liked by the residents here. They came to him. And what would you like to add, Rodd?
Well, he wasn't the only one like that. I mean, there were a lot of very well educated people here who just had misfortune, right? And they were using COTS to help get them back to self-sufficiency. And so many people commented about COTS' ability to make them feel supported, valued, loved, and COTS' ability to equip them with the tools necessary to reclaim self-sufficiency. And I also clearly recall a lot of people talking about how once they got back to self-sufficiency, how they wanted to either help COTS or do work to help other people who had been where they are.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when we were interviewing, although this was done in his own room here, but when we were interviewed, like in the lunchrooms here, and people sat down, and another COTS resident would come up and saying, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Well, can we be interviewed also? We feel that we have a story to be told." And it was very frank, and I keep using the word over compelling, because when you say, you know, in terms of the homeless, personally, I had never been on the street homeless, and it was, and to listen to the stories like that and what COTS has done in terms of, you call it opportunistic opportunities of self-sufficiency in a direction, whether it be educational, paying the rent and overhead. There's so much that COTS has accomplished as an organization to be proud of.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that compelled me, and I'm sure Rodd, to keep doing this over a span of 20 years.
I thought if I could dispel some of the false narrative or some of the myths around homelessness, it would be compelling enough for people to want to support COTS.
Absolutely.
Right? So I thought it would be a great fundraising opportunity.
And thank you for that, because that's one of the things that's so important to us, is helping to change the narrative. And I feel like the conversations that you've had over the years, and Larry, you mentioned this earlier, that many of the photos that you took over the course of the years were used in a variety of different marketing campaigns and initiatives over time. And it gave us an opportunity to share a different perspective, or share an honest and accurate perspective through the eyes of those that have lived it, that have experienced it. And it was an opportunity for them to share their story with dignity, and then for us to be able to promote it with, you know, equity in mind,
right,
and opportunity in mind. And I think of how this very conversation is what led to one particular campaign, and I don't think he's featured in the magazine. But do you all remember? And I can't say his last name because we're not disclosing last names. But there was a gentleman by the name of Paul. Do you remember Paul? An older gentleman who I don't know if Paul is in here right now. And I'll share. I have a picture of Paul, and I know that Paul will allow us to share his picture. So no, that's not him. But I will share with you the picture that you took of Paul some time ago. But ultimately, it led to a whole campaign called One Step Away, and it was this whole conversation behind behind the point that anybody could find themselves one step away from homelessness. And so it became. It was a broader point of conversation that we were able to have across all veins, and it led people to contact us and have the conversation about, okay, so talk to me a little bit more, because I always thought that, the individuals supported by COTS had come from this place of drug addiction or alcoholism, and we were able to say, no, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's generational poverty, sometimes it's situational poverty, and ultimately there's a variety of different things that impact people's lives that lead them to a place of homelessness, and our goal is to support them in a personalized manner to help them overcome that. It's not a blanket approach that works for everybody. Right. So yeah, I think that's what.
Yeah, and I think that approach was evident in the conversations that I had with people, that they felt, as I mentioned before, they felt supported and valued and loved and cared for.
Yeah.
Right. I think, universally had this belief that they were going to get back to self-sufficiency because of the work that you all did. And I cannot remember the last name. I mean, these stories are like your children. I don't have a favorite. I love them all. I just love them differently.
That's so awesome. That's awesome.
When you talk about the time span involved of 20 plus years, when I first started this, doing the photography, it was all black Kodaco.
Oh, yes.
Color. It wasn't digital at the time. And then we advanced to digital, just like some people have problems with IT in terms of advancing it. So sometimes the digital, if you remember, Rodd, wasn't always working the way we thought it would.
Yeah, but that's part of the beauty of it, your skills as a photographer. So when I was a reporter, I did a profile of Larry, and I had an opportunity to visit his office and see some of the photographs he had hanging up, which gave me the idea of him as a partner in this project.
That's awesome. So for those photography buffs out there, do you mind sharing with us just a little bit about the equipment that you used and kind of the approach that you took?
Sure. I graduated from a very elementary Nikon that I had that was more than 10 years old and non-digital, and then went to a Nikon, fairly sophisticated, which at the time today it was called the Nikon D3 and but it did portrait photography, and it did also blending in a micro in terms of the portrait photography. But one of the things that Rodd and I feel both, here it is, Rodd is interviewing, I'm taking photos at the same time. We say, okay, can you turn a little to the right? Can you turn a little? We'd like to get this shot. And Rodd had the ability, through his interview process, of very much putting people at ease. And when you talk about the frankness of compelling stories, I think it's a testament to Rodd in terms of bringing out these stories in people that made the accompanying photography a lot easier to do.
That's awesome. That's really awesome.
I appreciate that. And one of my favorite stories was actually of an employee who worked in the kitchen, and he made that such an enjoyable experience. And I like to cook. I worked in restaurants when I was in college. So his name is Theo. He was once homeless, and he got back to self-sufficiency and began to cook here. And his end was not ideal, but he did a great job of sharing his experiences with volunteers in ways that I think changed some of their perspective about people's ability to rise above homelessness, that situation people go through. And I really appreciated his ability to do that, as well as be compassionate to the residents that he was serving, because he understood what they had gone through.
There was another one that's felt, now that I'm looking through the book, and her name was Christina. She was pregnant when she came in, and she also had a baby at the time. She was married to her partner was an African American. She was white.
Yeah, they were looking forward to getting married.
Yeah, I'll go look at that. And I just again quoting what Rodd had during the interview, to quote this, I just felt my life was changed. It was different from that point, and she just starting a family of her own and wondering how they're going to have ends meet, and at the same time looking forward that she had a shelter here, and that there was a stepping process that you referred to, Aisha COTS has, and you just as Rodd was saying, you just become involved listening to these people's stories, and you can't help but feeling emotion.
Yeah, that's so awesome. That's so awesome. So I'm grateful, just for, first of all, the collaboration that you all came together and kind of just envisioned and then moved forward with. It's one thing to have an idea; it's another thing to actually take a step and actually execute an idea. But secondly,
there were many trips down here.
There were quite a few, I know. But second, the passion that you brought with it. Every time you talk to a group of people or an individual or a family, to tell them what you were doing, you discussed it with such passion. But I see the passion continuing today, and the way that you're sharing it with other people, the way that you're reaching out to friends, colleagues, just those that you know and that you engage with regularly, to share it, and then to also introduce them to the mission and the purpose of COTS. I just think about how that within itself speaks to what community really is all about.
Well, Rodd and I would very say it was a labor of love.
Yeah.
And through the generational time frame.
Yeah.
Now that some of these stories have made it to print, I'm going to start executing on my concept of fundraising using the publication as a vehicle for doing that.
I love that. I love that idea. And I would also, venture to say, I think that if you guys aren't tired of us yet after 20 years, then I would venture to say...
We're not getting rid of each other.
Okay, good. So that I would venture to say that, I could see, the next installment of this and what that looks like, and, being able to put together another project in the near future, and continue to tell the stories, and then to evolve, how we're telling them, your this project that you all started kind of became the birth, or kind of created ultimately what we call Art of Family right now, and it's our desire to, and our continued effort, ultimately this podcast, which is called The Art of Family, but our desire and our intentions to continue to tell these stories in compelling ways. We've recently worked with one of our families who you didn't have an opportunity to interview, but her name is Ethel, and she herself had a heart to want to become a photographer, and so she's begun photography. And so now she's starting to take pictures as well and helping to tell those stories. And so I just think about how you guys planted the seed and now how that seed is even growing in others just the same. So I look forward to continued collaborations with you all, and then even working with some of our former program participants as they become volunteers and as they begin to help us tell stories too. It's just kind of this.
Well, one of the recommendations that we had given to COTS after there's a period of time frame of 10 years and a lull in between that and picking up. But one of the recommendations, it would have been nice that you're doing it now in terms of saying, okay, to follow up for the people of COTS, like the Peggy's Place and that, of how they've embraced it and become self-sufficient and paying the rent and having education and recognizing the opportunities that you helped them through your one-step process. And so I think you're doing that now. Before you weren't doing that. And I think that'll be helpful for, again, of documenting the success stories of COTS.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the way that we're able to do that is, again, engaging them in more long-term relationships. And so we do that through the Passport to Self-Sufficiency. And then beyond that, it takes them from, this one step of being, becoming self-sufficient, which is really their initial goal once they come through our doors. But then now, how do you thrive? How do you go from becoming sufficient and maintaining sufficiency to then thriving? How do we, help you to become a homeowner? How do we help you to prepare to take your kids to college, send your kids to college, things of that nature? And so we're excited to see those things happening.
And when you all began to talk about that approach, it immediately made me think about two of the stories in here. One was about a single mom whose car broke down, and as a result of her car breaking down, she was no longer able to get to work or get her child to child care, and her life just quickly spiraled out of control as a result of her car breaking down, and she ended up here. the other is a single mom who had a flood in her basement, and as a result of all that water, it rotted the wood in one of the steps, and she was coming upstairs one day and fell through the stair and got injured, and as a result of that, couldn't work, fell into that cycle. Right. These were people who were self-sufficient. It was just a freak circumstance that sent their life onto a different trajectory. And so getting back to self-sufficiency felt real to them, but getting to that point where they could thrive so that they might be able to withstand something like that going forward is very important. I think recognizing that difference is really critical to understanding how homelessness affects so many different people.
Absolutely.
Rodd uses the word trajectory, and it made me want to fall back to this other family. Not family, it was a single male who had it was Eurasian, who had a daughter. She was probably at the time, 5, maybe 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And here it was.
Tran was his name, right?
And here it is. He had his own pathway of what he was going to do. He came here, and I don't know, from the time that we first, and his daughter was so captivating. And listening to the story, and he said, Larry, he says, and Rodd, he says, I'm going to make my own success story here. I just need the shelter for the time being, and I need the support group that COTS would add. And I am going to go out, and I am going to be self-sufficient. And the time that we came back, perhaps, 3 months later, he was gone on his own, and to do that.
And those are the stories I wish we could go back and reconnect with people on. I really do, just to know how they're doing and how they're thriving. But that's where we are now, just trying to make sure we're staying on top of staying connected, which is a new space. And I think back to Rachel, because you all captured Rachel's story initially, right?
Yeah.
When she first came in. And she's a phenomenal example of one that we've actually been able to follow every step of the way. And as you may have heard, she just recently graduated. She got her GED last year, and she's actually going to be graduating with her associate's degree next year.
That's great.
And she's continuing to go on to study social work. She wants to become a social worker. So.
Going back to Rodd's,
so many people wanted to do something to help.
Absolutely.
Going back to Rodd's word on trajectory, and I can't remember her name, but she wound up leaving COTS and forming her own business of people that were on the street. She had a sleeping bag that would convert into
Veronica Scott.
And she started here as a homeless person.
No. So actually, Veronica was actually a student.
She was a student.
Came in as and she was a volunteer. She came in as she was a student that had to do a project.
Okay, I thought it was an internship or something
at
like
CCS, I think. And Veronica, forgive me if I'm telling this story wrong, but I believe it was at CCS. She had to do a project, but she came in, met with COTS here, interviewed Cheryl, interviewed some other people, and then wanted to try to create this project. And the project became the Empowerment Plan. It's the organization that she now runs. But she came back and connected with COTS because she began hiring women from the shelter to actually manufacture and create these coats. And so even today, we're still partnered with her, and she provides jobs, and she works with our employment coach, and they collaborate. There's a coach that we have here that goes and works with the ladies there, and then she also hires outside of COTS now as well. But you talk about the beginning of a relationship that was formed years ago that you all were able to even connect and capture through story, and how that's grown to this day, and it's still impacting lives.
And that's why I think Rodd's use of the word trajectory sort of bodies what we tried to accomplish through telling the story.
And I don't think the work that COTS did at the time, it was providing very necessary shelter for people should be minimized either. Because I recall being here, one of those holiday events I alluded to before, when a family showed up because their house had just gotten burned down.
Oh, yes.
They had no place to go during the holiday. It was just tragic. And it was great for the volunteers to be there to see how one instant everything could be gone for somebody.
Yes.
And they need a place like that.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here and for connecting. Thank you for your long-term partnership, and thanks for being part of our family. That's what I'll say, because you guys aren't just your family, and I'm so grateful that you connected with us years ago, and that you became part of the family, and that you're continuing to help us to create opportunities to succeed every single day. Thank you.
You're certainly welcome. Anytime you need me, let me know.
Much appreciated.
And thanks to COTS again for embracing our concept.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And thank you all for listening. Continue to stay tuned for other podcast episodes that we will be sharing. By all means, please do follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at COTS Detroit. And then if you check us out on YouTube, subscribe to I Am COTS and follow our stories there. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
And donate.
Oh, and yes, please.
And give.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. If you want to partner with COTS, visit us online at cotsdetroit.org to learn how you can donate, how you can volunteer, how you can partner with us and become part of the family just like Larry and Rodd. Thanks so much.